All right, guys, welcome back to another episode. Well, not tier two of our Dynasty rookie wide receivers. If you're listening to the overall, this is going to be repetitive, but if you're listening to just this one, thank you for joining us. Find me over on Twitter at TDC_Calvin. I'm your host, Calvin Timms. My co host, Dale, find him over on Twitter at Dynasty_Dale. We just wrapped up tier number one, 4 guys that we like from this rookie wide receiver core. We're going to talk about 2 more here in tier number 2. So coming in first is going to be Jalen Hyatt. So Jalen Hyatt, 6 foot, 185. That's what he's listed at. Plays for Tennessee, 3-year player there. And boy, oh boy, this year was something special. And, I don't think it's a coincidence. I love Hendon Hooker. And it's, Hendon Hooker starting to look a little bit better this year. But, first two seasons, 20 catches for 276, 21 catches, 226, 4 touchdowns over those 2 years. This year, 67 for 1,267 yards, 15 touchdowns. Literally, he did all of his production came from this year, essentially. So, interesting prospect. He's 6 foot. Again, we just talked about it with Jordan Addison. He's got a little bit more weight on Jordan Addison by about 10 pounds, but these guys are very, very similar prospects. And the biggest aspect to Jalen Hyatt, and I saw a tweet or whatever news article come out today, that NFL teams are going to push him up the board because he's going to be so fast and all this stuff. And we know he's fast, but he's a slot wide receiver, and that's the scary part for Jalen Hyatt. Now, that's the same knock on guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown and, some of the other guys over the last couple of years. Oh, Amon-Ra can't be that good. He's a slot wide receiver. I don't really care if you get volume. You know what I mean? PPR leagues doesn't really matter that much, especially when you're fast and you're explosive like Amon-Ra St. Brown is. And I don't think Jalen Hyatt is Amon-Ra, but I think that Jalen Hyatt has potential to be a good slot wide receiver. A lot's going to depend for me on his 40 time. If he's really fast, like 4.3 fast, that could change my ranking on my thoughts on him a little bit. What do you think about Jalen Hyatt? I know you're not the biggest fan of him, right?
No, I am not a big fan of him, and I don't even really like him in tier 2. I think he's a trap. I think he's going to be the trap player in the wide receivers. I mean, he's obviously talented. He is. Like I get it. I see the talent, but he's a very limited route tree that he runs. Like it. I mean, like every play I see him, like just running like a 9 route, down the sideline and catching this bomb from Hendon Hooker. Which isn't a bad thing, but that's not realistic in the NFL. That's not going to happen every game.
Right.
It's just not. So,
Especially at that size too, you know what I mean?
right, at that size, I understand he's gonna be fast, but like also guys in the NFL are that fast too.
Right.
So I think he's gonna really struggle, and I feel he's you know I kind of see him being like the John Ross of the draft, personally.
To me,
You
it
know,
depends
you
where he
know.
gets drafted. If he,
Yes,
I don't
yes,
think he's going to be a first round wide receiver. And I know a lot of people are putting him there. I don't
right,
see it. And that's where I think the 4 that we talked about in tier 1 and I don't even think Boutte will be a first round wide receiver. I honestly think it might be 3 guys this year. And Boutte might be like 30 to 32 just because of what we talked
yeah,
about last time, the scarcity of these guys. But, if the off the field stuff, maybe Jalen Hyatt goes at the very end of round 1, but I just don't see it
right.
personally. So if
I
he's
don't either.
a day 2 guy, right? A round 2, probably upper round 2, that's when a lot of these skill players, people start to trade up for him and all that stuff. I don't hate it as much, There's less expectations at that point that they don't need him to come in and be the savior for the team, right? And I think that's where he could thrive, right? If he's not being thrust into please save us type of role, you know. Let's say that that the Pittsburgh Steelers decide they want to move on from Deontay Johnson this offseason, right? There's a lot of discontent there, we'll say it that way. Let's say they move on from Johnson and pick up Jalen Hyatt in the second round. maybe the late second. Maybe they use the second round. I think they have 2 second rounders next year. So let's say they use a second rounder on Hyatt. That could be somewhere where it'd be very interesting, right? It's someone where all of a sudden George Pickens is the number one guy. You've got some other guys there too, and Hyatt doesn't have to produce insanely well. He's the number 3, number 4 option for the team, which for fantasy doesn't necessarily mean he's useless, but it just means from an actual NFL standpoint, the pressure's off him a little bit more there. So, yeah, he's an interesting prospect for sure.
Yes.
Now,
yeah.
The biggest thing for him is he did have that massive boom, and I know he played. I believe he played with Hendon Hooker in 2021, if I remember correctly, right?
I believe so.
Yes. Did they lose anybody that year? I'm just pulling it up really quickly. Okay, so he was the number 3 in terms of targets. Velus Jones Jr. was ahead of him, and Cedric Tillman is another guy. He's kind of interesting. The problem with Cedric Tillman, I don't have him ranked. He's a super senior. That's the one problem. He had 5 years of college play, all at Tennessee. But yeah, he's injured again, so that's kind of just the big reason why. But in 2021, Cedric Tillman destroyed it for the receiving for this team. But yeah, he was just the number 3 option that year. I don't know really. I mean, I didn't think Velus Jones was that big of a gatekeeper, but obviously here we are in 2022. All of a sudden, Jalen Hyatt looks amazing. So there's something that has to be said about that, All right. So any last thoughts on him before we move on to the next guy here?
No.
All right. Let's see. All right, so the next guy is going to be Josh Downs. Now, this guy is someone that I've seen all over the place. A lot of people have him a lot higher. A lot of people have him a lot lower. He's very polarizing, it seems, right now, early in the offseason. Comes in at 5'10", 175. Pretty solid size for a wide receiver. If you're going to be lighter, at least he's shorter. But I don't love shorter wide receivers. I'm trying to, avoid them a little bit more. And again, that kind of goes to the problem with this whole draft class is they're small for the most part. They're all just pretty tiny. But plays for North Carolina, UNC, was really good his sophomore year, did nothing basically his freshman year there. Played really well with Sam Howell in his sophomore year. 101 catches for 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns. Played just as good almost this last year. North Carolina is going through a whole new quarterback. They got Drake May, who is a pretty heavy favorite to be a first round, one of the top guys next year in the draft class. But, you look at all of the production. He was the number 1 on this team in terms of receptions by a mile. A little bit of a dip in production. He goes from a 13.2 average to a 10.9 average. Not terrible there, but he did tick up in the touchdowns as well. So he's a big reason why Drake May looks as good as he does. And, I think that he's part of the reason why Sam Howell looked as good as he did as well. He's very quarterback friendly is the best way to kind of put him. And, you look at both years, both of those high production years. In his sophomore year, 101 receptions. The next guy had 31, 70 reception gap there. And then the same thing this last year, 94 receptions, 43 was the next guy. So that's a massive difference there. And that just tells you how pivotal he was to this team. And that's why I like him a lot more. Again, the biggest downside is going to be size a little bit. He's a little bit tinier, but man, the dude can ball. The dude can ball for sure. What are your thoughts on him before I'll show some clips while you're talking here.
Right. And yeah. So it's with Downs. Like he's a very productive player. He has very good footwork, which I think that helps him with his size and to be really productive in the NFL. Like he has a good route tree, so I can really expect him produce more earlier than like a Jalen Hyatt, for instance. size is a big issue. I'm more worried that I'm just worried that like he didn't play against necessarily all the greatest talent, and he wasn't pressed as much. Like I think that's been the biggest knock on these wide receivers is that they haven't really been challenged physically as much compared to like last year's receivers, for instance. So you know
Sure.
um so like I think that's been the biggest thing I've seen. So I think he's good. I think I would rather have him over Hyatt, personally.
I
But
think
you know
I
you know
after
I
talking
know
through it, I
I
think I kind of agree with it. It's going to come down to
yeah,
draft slot. That's the biggest
it
thing. I
does,
think
it does, I
I think
agree.
the reason why I've highlighted one above him, and again, they're really close, same tier here. So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
I think that they're very close, right? Obviously, if
yes,
I'm okay with all of them in the same tier, but I think that Hyatt just has a little bit more explosion than Downs does. Like Downs
yeah,
is a good player and he can ball out. I think he has better hands than Hyatt does. But,
yeah,
you get the ball to Hyatt in space, and I think that there's a very real chance he can take it to the house, right? Where Josh Downs,
right,
I think that he's more of you know, and this is going to sound almost like a knock a little bit, but like Juju's kind of the guy that I go to in my mind for him, right? Where he plays in the middle of the field, he plays physical, which for Juju it makes sense because he's like 6'3" or whatever, 220 pounds, but like he's a big dude. But Josh Downs, he plays like a big dude in a smaller body, right? But he's just not the burner kind of guy. He's not going to get it and just house it, He plays more physical in my mind. When I see clips of him, that's kind of what I picture for him. So, um, that's the only reason why I have high a little bit above him for fantasy. I kind of think that if you're getting a guy that's going to be playing slot, which both of these guys kind of project to be slot players, right? Give me the guy that can house it on almost any play, right?
right. Right. No, and I fully get it. It's really based on your preference. It's when you're going into rookie drafts. I think I would rather have Josh Downs because I know the production has been there and can be there. As compared to Hyatt. You know that's kind of why I'm scared of. From last year, like with Jamison Williams, I'm a little bit weary of him because he only had that 1 year production. So it's four players. I feel safer taking ones that had the production in college for at least 2 years and showed
Sustained,
they were
yeah.
something.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
gotcha.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So like I'm more worried about players that kind of have that boom in 1 year, and you're like, oh great, like are they gonna be able to have that? Like is it based on speed? Is it based on
Right.
opportunity? Is it based on the talent that was on their team and they played against
Hmm.
like that? So it's all of those factors go into.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing because at least with Jalen Hyatt, it all came in year three, right? Where
Yeah,
this last year, which you like to see that at least. That tells you that he's
yeah,
at least
yes,
progressing forward. It
yeah,
wasn't like the guy Brian Edwards, big miss by me,
yeah,
right? Brian Edwards, but he was really good as like a freshman, pretty good as a sophomore,
mm,
not as great as a junior. So he kind of was the reverse, right? Where he showed it all really early and then just didn't really maintain that, right? Where at least with Jalen Hyatt, it was a little bit less opportunity, and then boom, got all the opportunity and made something of it, right? So you do
mm,
like to see that a little bit in there, but it was a very big change for Jalen Hyatt. So I can understand why people are skeptical on it, but you see it from quarterbacks all the time. Sometimes it works out just fine. Sometimes it doesn't, but Zach Wilson kind of thing.
yep, yep,
Um, but I mean, you look at who was the other, like Joe Burrow, wasn't he just really amazing his last year, or did he have 2 years?
yeah, yeah.
I think it was just
Well,
one year, right?
it was 2 years at LSU, but he was kind of
Mediocre his
mid his
first year,
first
right?
year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it was very mid compared to his
right.
senior year.
Right. So at least it came in the last year, and that's the one thing I do like to
Yeah,
see with Jalen Hyatt. But ultimately, these two guys, I think testing is going to be big for him. I think Jalen Hyatt's going to be fast. I think Josh Downs is going to be solid, but he's not going to be as fast. He's probably going to run like I'm going to make an estimation right here. I'm going to say Josh Downs comes in at 4.46. That's gonna be my guess. 4.46 for him. But where I think Jalen Hyatt is going to come in at like 4.32, somewhere in that range. That's what I kind of predict for him. So that's going to be a big difference. And when your NFL team's looking at that, that's going to be the difference maker for draft capital. Now, in this podcast, we don't really care that much about draft capital as much as talent, right? So that's the big thing there. But when we got these guys in the same tier, and we'll talk about it after the combine because these are my rankings, right, where I have them. You might not have them in the same tier, but for now, we have them in the same tier. So that's the one thing is you can use draft capital as a decision maker for you, the tiebreaker for you, but it's not going to be the ultimate decision maker for me where I'm going to say, oh, well, because he was a second round pick and Josh Downs was a third round pick, they deserve to be in different tiers. That's not how that's going to work, right? So we'll see where these guys go. Combine will be interesting. We'll see what the rankings do after the combine for all these wide receivers because that could have a lot of impact, especially when we get to this next tier because there's a few guys in this next tier. I want to move them up, but I'm scared to. I'm not going to lie to you. So that said, anything else you want to talk about these two guys before we take a quick break and come back with tier 3?
Nope.
All right. So thank you guys for listening to this one. Again, follow us on Twitter. Go back and just look at YouTube. It's listed right below our pictures. There are pretty little faces. But make sure you're subscribing, leaving a comment wherever you're listening to the podcast. We appreciate it every time you do. It just helps with the algorithm, all that stuff. So thank you guys. We'll be right back with tier 3 for the rankings.